privilege to be the president of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, and I am proud that the Honorable Tawana Gaines is in fact my delegate in the Maryland House of Delegates. Thank you, Tawana, for your She's not only the president of the Maryland Women Legislators and also the Women's Caucus, she also is on the very important Appropriations Committee, and also very near and dear to our hearts, the Committee on Children, Youth, and Families. All the things that we know are crucial to not only this group, but to a very strong state. It's a great pleasure to introduce my friend, my delegate, our friend, the Honorable Tawana Gaines.
I have work to do, and I want to thank you so very much. I did bring a small citation. We have our very own citation. It's from Women Legislators of Maryland. It's an official citation. We actually got the General Assembly to help design this on our behalf. And it just talks about the pioneering work that the center has done. We really appreciate it, and thank you so very much.
Now it is a pleasure for me to introduce the person who really had the initial vision for the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. And it was her idea, as she always likes to say, to add her story to his story, so to tell our story. And so Jill first came to me many years ago now. Of course, I thought it was an amazing idea, and here we are today. So I want to thank Jill for her vision and her leadership, and she's been the executive director and my longtime friend and colleague. Please welcome Jill Moss.
Thank you, Francie. I have to say, when she brought up the original meeting was when Francie was getting the award for Young Career. I have to say, when she brought up the original meeting was when Francie was getting the award for Young Career Woman of the Year from College Park BPW, and I was the speaker at that. Event, so it was a long time ago. But Kay Campbell Stevenson has brought all of this history to life, and this is her new program with the Women of STEM, including one woman who is actually related to her. And we are so looking forward to it, Kate, and we can't thank you enough for your ongoing contributions to the arts and to the Maryland Women's Heritage Center.
Your life is a story, it's written each day by the choices you make at school, work, or home, by the people you meet, or the things that you say, by the fears that you face until they go away. Your life is a story, it's scripted by you, by the new things you learn, by the things that you do. You can reach for the stars, you can help others too. You can learn from the past so our futures come true. His story, her story, some stories sing of glories, other stories sing of love and pain. My story, your story, we write our own stories of new frontiers or dreams we can attain. You can skate for the glory of winning the gold. You can study the brain to help young and old. You can fly into space or create something bold, or do quiet good deeds that will never be told. Some women before me whose stories I know have taught me some lessons which have helped me to grow. I'd love you to meet just a few of these friends. I am scripting a story, who knows how it ends. His story, her story, some stories sing of glories, other stories sing of love and pain. My so pleased to be sharing my program with you today. And before we go any farther, I want to say that today I'm dedicating this performance to Dr. Mary Cleve and Dr. Claire Parkinson, who were my inspiration for putting this program together when I met them at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. The women I portray have courage. The courage to step out into the unknown. And the curiosity to say, hey, what's around the next corner? What's happening in other countries? What are other cultures about? And they also had the determination to hang in there when the going got tough. It was very challenging back in their lifetime, and it's challenging in our world today. We can learn from these women how they broke through their barriers and obstacles to obtain their goals. Right now, travel with me back to the year 1922. The place, Chicago, Illinois. It's the Roaring Twenties. Yes, indeed. Transportation has gone from the horse and buggy to those fantastic, fabulous flying machines. And a young girl by the name of Bessie Coleman. Bessie Coleman has grown from a youngster picking cotton in the fields of Waxahachie, Texas, to a manicurist, to a Southside Chicago celebrity, to a world-class aviator. Bessie Coleman was one of the first American women pilots. She was the first African-American, male or female, ever to get her international license. And she did this until 2 years before another famous American woman pilot. Anybody out there have an idea who that might be? Amelia Earhart, right. Well, remember this. Bessie Coleman flew 2 years before Amelia Earhart. She was a woman with style and flair. She loved soaring through the air, fancy uniforms and makeup, and she never ever shirked at a challenge.
Welcome to the air show. Welcome to Chickamauga Aerodrome, Chicago's premier airstrip, featuring death-defying feats by the world's only black aviatrix. See Queen Bess, daredevil aviator do loop-de-loops and figure eights, defying the force of gravity.
How'd you over here? Will you come to my air show? Yes. Fantastic. Listen, if you like what you see out there, I want all of you to go run and tell your mamas that you want to take flying lessons from my flying school. Bessie Coleman School of Aeronautics. Yes, indeed. All my life, I wanted to be somebody. Well, I helped my mama raised my 3 younger sisters, and it wasn't cotton picking season. We'd walk 5 miles to school every morning, and then back again. My favorite books were about Booker T. Washington, Paul Laurence Dunbar, and of course, Harriet Tubman. She was my hero. My mama was real big on the 3 R's, oh yeah. She'd say to me, Bessie, if you learn how to fly, you can do anything. And it'll take you places. And Lord Almighty, I wanted to get out of Waxahachie, Texas. Finally, I did. I made it all the way up to Chicago, Illinois. I went up there to live with my brother John, who was a porter up there on the trains. And I went to beauty school to learn how to do the nails of the fancy black businessmen up there on State Street. I did job for 5 long years. Then one day my brother John comes sashaying back from the Great War. You know, war to end all wars. He comes marching mighty sassily into my beauty salon and he goes, Bessie, you ain't never gonna be like any of those women over in France who can fly. And I looked at him and I said, John, that is it. That's what I want to learn how to do. I want to learn how to fly. The air will be my arena for my ambition. So, I looked around for somebody to teach me. Only there weren't nobody. There weren't any black instructors, and the whites sure wouldn't teach me. Oh, I reckon being female had something to do with it. That didn't stop me. No siree, not Bessie Coleman. All my life I wanted to be somebody. So, I looked around for somebody else to help me. And I found Mr. Robert Abbott, the editor and publisher of the Chicago Daily Defender, the world's greatest black newspaper. And he said to me, Bessie, I believe in you, and I believe you can do anything if you just put your mind to it. Why, you work real hard for a year and save your money, and you go to night school and learn French. I'll help you make it all the way over to France to learn how to fly. And that is exactly what I did. Oh, I think the most exciting time of my life is when I did my first solo flight. Oh, I felt so free with the air just racing by my face, looking down on the tops of the trees. And after 10 months of flight school, I received my pilot's license from the prestigious Fédération Aéronautique Internationale. And I finally felt I was on my way to becoming somebody. When I got off the boat and I went back to the States, there were newspaper reporters everywhere hailing me the world's greatest woman flyer. Then one lady, she yells to me out from the crowd. She goes, Hey, Bessie, why do you want to learn how to fly? Lord knows there's only a little bit of wood and wire holding you up in that sky. Well, I looked at her and I stood up straight and I said, Flying is the way of the future. And our race has to keep up with the rest of the world. Yes, I did. I told her that. And I believe it. But you know, I am so excited to fly for you all here today. For when I soloed in France, that was for foreigners. And when I flew at Curtis Airfield in New York, well, that was for mostly strangers. But here at Checkerboard Airdrome in Chicago, Illinois, I can display my flying skills in front of my friends, my family, and my own people, and prove to them that I really am somebody. Well, I tell you, I can't wait to get out there and show them how to fly. I hear the roar of the planes. I'll see all of you up there. Bessie Coleman. While Bessie Coleman was forging the frontiers for women in aviation, polar exploration also was captivating the public interest. Robert Scott, Admiral Perry, Shackleton, Raoul Amundsen were all famous male polar explorers. But there was one woman, Louise Arner Boyd. Who? Louise Arner Boyd. In the 1920s and the 1930s, Louise Arner Boyd led 7 Arctic expeditions. And she mapped out the floor of the North Atlantic. And she also was one of the first people to use sonar technology. She came from a hearty family of adventurers. Her father made his money in in the gold and silver mining in California, and then went on to do investment banking in San Francisco. And Louise was brought in to the family business. And at the ripe old age of 22, she became the president of the Boyd Investment Company, which in 1909 was a position almost unheard of for a woman to obtain. As a wealthy heiress and businesswoman, Louise Boyd did the typical grand tours to Europe and Asia. But on a lark, she went north to a place called Spitsbergen, also known as Svalbard. Here's a smaller map looking at the top of the world. North Pole, there is Spitsbergen, Svalbard. And there she hired a tourist boat captain to take her out to see this enormous belt of ice that comes down from the North Pole and separates the East Coast fjords from the rest of the world for over 9 months of the year. It was that trip that changed Louise Arner Boyd's life. Right now, let's travel back to the year 1945. Louise Boyd, in all her regalia, will be speaking to a group of women at the Society for Women Geographers. Captain, you said you can smell ice. I can't. I hear something. Beaches of ice, you say? In the middle of the ocean? Away from this forklift? Soldiers of ice stand just on the horizon. Pillars of blue-green thrusting themselves from the sea. Where others fear, I see a great invitation. I am on fire, my dreams are awakening. Look through the glass at all the adventures before us. Gather our grit, hearts beating strong to prepare. Obstacles fade when passions ignite us with promise. We must forge the frontiers if we dare. And that's what I felt when I caught my first glimpse of Arctic pack ice. And my life was changed forever. Good afternoon. I am so pleased to be sharing some of my Arctic stories with my sisters of adventure here at the Society for Women Geographers. In 1924, I went north to the Arctic Circle, and I found my life's calling. Over the last 30 years, I've led 7 Arctic expeditions, mapped out the floor of the North Atlantic and the east coast of Greenland, and I even discovered a huge undersea mountain bank, which is most helpful to know about if you are traveling by submarine. Today, I'm known as the Ice Woman. What do you think of when you think of ice? Cold. A flat, slippery surface on your street? cubes in a glass. Did you know that there are over 90 different terms describing ice? Glaciers, hummocks, pack ice, blue ice, black ice. In 1924, I could feel the ice and the Arctic calling to me. And when the captain described the magical land of the fjords in Greenland beyond the ice belt, I ran to the front of the ship and shouted, "Someday, Captain, I want to be way in there looking out instead of out here looking in." So, with that goal in mind, I raced back to sunny California and read and studied everything I could about the Arctic. And I wrote to the top experts. I hired the MS Hobby, once the flagship of the famous Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. And I invited a group of friends to join me on a photo and hunting expedition in Franz Josef Land. Though I realize that most of you geographers know where Franz Josef Land is. But in case there are a few that do not, Franz Josef Land is the farthest northern land point in the Eastern Hemisphere. There, larger map here. Only 600 miles from the North Pole. Over there we found millions of birds and saw huge walrus and seals and my favorite, polar bears. I adore polar bears. So much so, I adopted them as my personal mascot. The MS Hobby is a small plain ship, not a large ocean liner as I was accustomed. My room was in the very front or bow of the ship, and the width was that of my two outstretched hands, and the length that of my bunk. There was no running water, and only a couple pegs on the wall, and two drawers underneath my bunk for storage. As I was settling in, I reached down into one drawer, and then I found foot-long sticks of something that looked oddly like Christmas candy. Puzzled, I went to the captain and asked, "Is this candy?" And with a look that went right through me, he said, "No, not candy, dynamite." "You don't smoke, do you?" I assured him that I did not. But he asked me to replace it back in the drawer so he would know where to find it in case he needed to blow up some ice along the way. Well, I resigned myself to the situation and nicknamed it my buddy. My dynamite buddy and I shared a small mutual cabin throughout the rest of the journey. Oh, the Arctic is a great teacher about the common sense side of life. Oh, I left my fancy dresses and coats and shoes back on land, and when at sea I would dress in practical breeches and warm woolen sweaters and scarves. Oh, I didn't bother with my hands so much because, just so they wouldn't get frozen. But whenever I went up on deck, I did powder my nose. I believe a woman can rough it and still remain feminine. Oh, I would always pick up a weed or a flower or a plant wherever I could find one when we were off exploring. And also, I always wear a hat. In fact, I could never imagine going out without one. Unless, of course, it's to the dentist. When I was on that trip, I came face to face with myself. What was I going for? What was my purpose? Not trained as a scientist, but trained with a camera. I decided that my eyes and my camera lens must accurately depict every land and seascape we encountered. So, my purpose was twofold, that of leader and photographer. I'd spent 2 years planning every detail of my next trip. But when I arrived back in Norway in 1928, the entire Scandinavian world was in an uproar. The famous Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had become lost, and along with his 2 pilots in their hydroplane, they simply vanished. Hundreds of people were in a race against time to find these lost explorers. Well, in all good conscience, I could not continue my trip as planned. So I joined the search, and I donated my services and my ship and my crew to aid in the search for Amundsen. We were quickly dispatched to Spitsbergen to pick up 2 Norwegian pilots and their hydroplanes. My ship was most suited for that because we could balance the hydroplanes on either side of the ship when they weren't flying. We spent over 3 months and sailed 10,000 nautical miles searching for Amundsen, and I recorded every aspect of the search on cinema and in still photography. But sadly, in September, the wheel cover to Amundsen's plane was found floating off the north coast of Norway. The search was ended, presuming all 3 had perished in the icy waters. I learned much that summer. I became driven to make a difference in Arctic exploration and geography. I hired the top scientists, and I equipped them with the most precise instruments that modern science had developed. I used new mapping techniques to create reconnaissance scale maps. And I even discovered the De Geer Glacier, which is the largest source of icebergs for the entire fjord region. And later, I discovered, I heard, or saw on a map that was newly published by the Danish government that the ice fjord, the inner reaches of the ice fjord, which I had explored and mapped out, had been named Vis Boyd Lund. Miss Boyd's land. The most challenging of the entire expeditions came in September of 1933. We had stayed much later in Greenland than we had anticipated. Now, every Arctic explorer knows the dangers of ice entrapment. Well, with the wintry ice fast descending upon our ship, we ran aground. The captain quickly reversed the engines and threw all its power to back off. We were stuck. We had run aground at high tide, and the sticky sediment at the bottom of the fjords had allowed our ship to settle. We were on a soon-to-be-frozen east coast of Greenland. It was looking very, very dire. We had to act quickly. We removed everything we could from the ship, trying to lighten its load, hoping that the incoming tide would free us. The tide came and went. We didn't budge. It was so frightening. And yet, it was the ingenious Captain Olsen who, seeing an iceberg conveniently floating by, ordered a cable thrown around the iceberg and attached it to the ship's winch. And we very, very slowly reeled that iceberg in and lodged it tightly against the ship. And then we waited for the incoming tide. And as the water was rising, along with the iceberg's buoyant help, we were freed and made our way through nature's closing doors safely back to Norway. The very thing that sought to kill us became our saving grace. Ice. Travel with me now to the year 1963. The place, Silver Spring, Maryland. There we will find a 56-year-old marine biologist and writer about books of the sea. Rachel Carson wrote 3 wonderful books about the sea. And in those books, she brought to life a world which up until that time was really only known in scientific terms. But her beautiful prose brought that world underneath the sea to everyday people like you and me. She also wrote a book called Silent Spring. And in that book, she sounded the alarm about environmental pollution. Her book targeted 11 chemicals which severely were harming our environment, such as chlordane and DDT. President Kennedy got wind of this new problem of environmental pollution, and he formed his president's scientific advisory committee to look into this problem. Rachel Carson was a reserved woman. She didn't seek out publicity for herself, but she felt that she must speak up for the dangers that she saw was happening with pollution. She was raised by her mother in western Pennsylvania, and it was her mother that gave her the incredible sense of wonder as they would take walks in the countryside. The chemical companies, after Silent Spring came out, were very, very upset because it started to impact their profits. So they spent over $250,000, which back in 1963 was a lot of money, to defame her reputation as a scientist. What does she know? She's just a woman scientist. Well, Rachel Carson knew a lot. Her impeccable scientific method could not be disproved, and all the data that she gathered proved her point. But she was asked to come and defend her work in front of Congress. And the entire time she was writing Silent Spring, which was approximately 5 years, Rachel Carson was fighting a fight she knew she would not win. She was dying of cancer. And she didn't want anybody to know because she was afraid that her opponents would use her failing health or her weak health and correlate that with her science, that was weak as well. So she was very, very private about her illness. This next scene takes place as she is preparing for the speech. And she's putting on her wig because she's lost most of her hair to the cancer treatments. And she's calling out to the spirit of her mother to be with her and give her strength. Rachel Carson is in a lot of pain and very frail, but she's determined to speak out. Everything you hear spoken is her testimony in front of Congress. Everything you hear sung are her thoughts, her feelings, her passion for protecting the environment. The shelter casts a spell in my heart, such a sense of wonder, a sense of wonder walk together. Watch the leaves falling, finding flowers wild. Don't touch them. Lichens at the base of the trees. Get down on my knees where I can smell the earth. A bird taking flight. Oh, there's red on its wings. On its wings. For I'm filled with a sense of wonder. Such a sense of wonder fills my heart. I am fulfilled with a sense of wonder. Which you, dear mother, brought into my heart. Oh, mother, I miss you so much. Please be with me today. I need your strength.
June 4th, 1963. Senate testimony begins today on the controversial use of pesticides. Rachel Carson, award-winning author of Silent Spring, will testify before the President's Science Advisory Committee, headed by Senator Abe Ribicoff.
Mother, are you watching? Is this just a show? The tiny little creatures depend on us to know. Oh, I don't feel strong now. How can I go on? Who will make them think after I'm gone? Please, someone out there today, listen to me. Listen to me. Let the forest keep its voice and make my weary heart rejoice.
Ms. Carson, on behalf of the committee, we certainly welcome you here. You are the lady who started all this.
Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee. Senators, the problem you have chosen to explore is one that must be solved in our time. I feel strongly that a beginning must be made on it now, in this session of Congress. God, please make them listen. God, please make them care. We must stop indiscriminate use of pesticides. Make my words have power. Floating on the air. These chemicals invisibly contaminate our world. Oh, I don't feel strong now. How can I go on? As we bring these chemicals under control, we are headed for disaster. Who will make them think? After I'm gone, there will be an irrevocable loss of species. Do they have a conscience? Is this just a show? The tiny little creatures depend on us to know. Oh God, please make them listen. God, please make them care. Why do they attack me? These critics everywhere. Let them care, make them care, all the people everywhere. Mother's legacy to me, I appreciate a tree and every creature in the sea. Let them care, make them care, all the people everywhere. The only science that is deserving is that which helps us in preserving nature in its glory everywhere. By the power of my words, I've searched everywhere to make my message known. To make them see was not a dynamic personality. She was not a dynamic celebrity, but she was very much a dynamic woman. And it is so important to understand those differences. Her lone voice in the wilderness helped change the way the entire world looks at its responsibility for taking care of our earth, our water, and the air that we breathe. Please join Rachel Carson in her quest for protecting our most precious environment. Now, a little contemporary part of what my program is. I want to share with you, remember I was talking about the soldiers of ice standing in the, that Louise Arner Boyd saw? That would be the kind of view that Louise Boyd had in the Arctic. Those incredible, incredible icebergs, blues and greens. These are actually Louise Arner Boyd's photographs. You can get an idea. These were taken back in the 1920s and the 1930s, and how fabulous the perspective is. How she would capture the strata. That's the little boat, ship, that they traveled in. You can get an idea about the immenseness of the Arctic. Talking about the Arctic, the ice enveloping their ship. Ice entrapment was very much a real danger. She went through 2 or 3 pairs of shoes when she'd go across these glaciers. Most people think a glacier is kind of smooth. Well, it's not. Trying to travel across those glaciers was really tough business. This is Louise Glacier in Greenland, which is named after Louise Boyd. Now, I talked about this ice belt that comes down from the North Pole. I was fascinated. I had a friend about 10 years ago who was able to get me this satellite photograph of the iceberg. Now, on the very, very far left is actually the edge of Greenland. So you can see now, Claire, how far up are these satellites? 100 miles?
700 kilometers.
700 kilometers above the. So that's the view that in 1986. She was quite a dichotomy. She was this grande dame of San Francisco society, and then she could carry her own weight with these salty sailors. She also was the first woman to fly over the North Pole. She had enough money to hire somebody to help her do it, but she was determined. That was her dream. Her goal was to see the North Pole. Sarah Evans is a women's studies professor, and she wrote a wonderful book called Born for Liberty. She has a quote, "Having a history is a prerequisite to claiming a right to shape the future." And the Maryland Women's Heritage Center helps us do that. This is where I met, well actually it was shortly after I met Dr. Parkinson, on the 10th anniversary of the Aqua Project. And when I found out that she was an expert in the exact same area that Louise Arner Boyd was exploring, the hair on the back of my neck actually stood up. Here's Claire early on in the Arctic. And this is, how many instruments are on the Aqua? 6 instruments. And this is in the clean room preparing to launch, then they launched off. Now, this is how it ties into schools when we go into schools, because you remember how cold of that Arctic vortex that came down this year? Well, this is a picture from the MODIS instrument and on the Aqua satellite. And also it helps with the hurricanes and warning everybody about the dangers of weather that are coming in, and we have more and more with climate change to be concerned about. And also with forest fires. You know, the western part of our country particularly is just going up in flames. And the Aqua satellite helps us with that, the technology. This is at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center when Dr. Florence Tan was there. When I go to the schools, I can show people. Dr. Tan was born in a Malaysian fishing village, and she made it all the way over here to the United States, and has her doctorate, and she is a NASA scientist, and she is the lead electrician. That's her baby. Everything that's electric right now on the Mars rover, she's in charge of. Wow. Women can do it. Yes. And at the Maryland Heritage Center, we had Tech Trek, and Claire and Mary Cleve, Dr. Cleve, and Florence Tan were there, sharing in the excitement of these young girls seeing and talking to these scientists. I want to share a story about Dr. Cleve, and I'm so pleased you're here today. Never give up your dream. She wanted to be an astronaut. And she started off, and she learned how to fly before she could even learn how to drive a car. And she wanted to be, after she graduated from college, she wanted to go on to be a pilot, an airline pilot. And they said, no, I'm sorry, we don't hire women. So she went on and got her master's degree, and that was in microbial ecology, thank you. And so then she decided, well, I'd like to, I still want to fly. Maybe I can be a stewardess, which is what they call them. And they said, I'm sorry, you can't be a stewardess because you're too short. Now, so she went on to get her doctorate in, help me out here, I'm sorry? Environmental engineering. Engineering. Because Title IX had just come out. And they were helping to support women scientists, women going into engineering school. And so she did. Well, the message here is, every time you hear a no, it means new opportunity. New opportunity. And then Mary went on to be on two space shuttles, and now she is still serving in an advisory capacity with NASA Goddard. And thank you so much. She is speaking to some of our young people. A young girl, Zakiya Tomlinson, is from Columbia, Maryland. When she was in high school, in elementary school, she was fascinated by robotics. And so she went in her sophomore year to space camp. And she went on to major in science and robotics. And I'm gonna go back there. She was down in Houston teaching the astronauts how to use a robotic arm. Pretty amazing stuff. And here she is working with our young girls, and look how they're just lit up with her seeing this young, vivacious-faced young scientist. I can be a scientist too. We have all these CSI shows on television, and so the chemistry and the forensics is really big. A lot of opportunity here. This is in Montgomery County, Leah King, and Robin Teschlik is a leader in IT technology for Livermore Labs. Now, of course, cyber technology, cybersecurity is huge right now, and we need young women going into these fields as well. There is plenty of opportunity. Lisa Wilt from Columbia, Maryland. She was inspired by Rachel Carson, and she's a young marine biologist, and she spends most of her time out on the Chesapeake Bay gathering up samples and testing water, and here she is analyzing marine life. Verena Zeno, she's a geologist. There you go, Janet Crampton, I had to get that in. She works up in Canada and Alaska, and not everybody's a scientist is in a little lab. This is the world is her laboratory. And she's out here doing reconnaissance and orientation measurements. And this is not oil. She's out surveying and checking on 4 gold drilling sites in Canada. So she travels by boat, by helicopter. She's camping out in a bush camp in the middle of nowhere, traveling by snowshoes and skis. Sounds like quite an adventure to me. Who likes to look up at the stars? Vera Rubin, when she was a 10-year-old growing up, she dreamed of being an astronomer. She loved gazing up at the sky. She's originally from Bethesda, Maryland. Here she is through her telescope. In the 60s, you can tell it's the 60s by that lovely dress. And she went on to receive the highest award, the National Medal of Science, from President Clinton, for her major accomplishments. Dr. Nancy Grace Roman, another woman from Maryland. She's the mother of the Hubble. That's her title. She was the first scientist ever hired at NASA Goddard. And I put her in as, she's a contemporary role model because just this past June I was with her at the AAUW Nick Whistle Awards conference at University of Maryland. And I was working with my friend Dr. Stocker here and taking care that she was getting around. She had a walker and she was walking, and I thought, oh gee, okay, I'm going to help pave the way. And after the speeches, we got her into I found a table and I could get her seated. And I said, here you go, Dr. Roman. And she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, I'm not going to sit down. And she went with her walker and she talked to all these young women from there were over, how many women were there?
800 plus.
800 women from around the country from these colleges. And there she was, she's in her late 80s, early 90s, and she was saying, I'm not going to sit down, I'm going to go talk to these women. And they were all gathered around her. And she was such a mentor and role model. She's a role model for all of us here today. That no matter what our age, we can go for our dreams. We can develop ourselves to our finest potential. What's left to be done, everybody? Let's do it. I know, one last slide, and I'm going to tie it up here. Each one of us can change the world, for we are made of star stuff. And you are connected to the universe. Thank you very much.
Kate, you are incredible. We know this is the first time you did this full program, and she didn't say that Louise Arner Boyd is her relative. We have a couple of things for you in gratitude, and I want to introduce Linda Shevitz, who I mentioned earlier, my total partner in crime, and Wilhelmina Buress, who has a special presentation for Kate.
So moved and inspired when I hear Kate, either on a personal level or when she's performing. We want to give her the traditional performers. And then we want to give a special gift. This is an appreciation to Kate Campbell Stevenson for providing leadership and forging frontiers as a woman of courage, commitment, creativity, character, and honoring the contributions of all of us and all of the contributions of women throughout our history. We have any of you want to write a little message to her, there's a folder up here with some, probably the only cultural ambassador anywhere.
Kate, you were simply fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for bringing alive those women throughout the decades. And we cannot thank you enough, not only for bringing it here, but for the students, the children, and not only for women, but so that men also can appreciate the contributions that have come in this way.
Thank you so much, Kate. Those stories, they were powerful and compelling stories of women's courage and determination, and brains, of course, we knew that. But those are, again, that's part of why it's important. And you talked about dreams, I talked about dreams earlier. Again, the dreams of folks earlier lead to action. From those, we have dreams again. And we hope some of our young people in the audience have some dreams because of the actions and the dreams of others that they saw today. Because that is how our society develops and evolves. Thank you so much.